Based on what's public, what is your theory? I mean, do you think it was a kidnapping? Oh, I think something went horribly wrong inside that house. And she wasn't alive anymore when it happened. Because, there was blood. I mean, that's public knowledge now. And there was blood outside too. So it's unlikely she survived whatever happened there, because she managed to get out. That explains those drops. Then again, we don't even know how much evidence there is. And why does it stop? Where does she go? Those kind of details. Did she get into a car? Follow a path? It's like she vanished. There is a moment when you step inside a house and you just know. You can't point to one specific thing. You can't explain it right away, but your brain registers it before your own eyes do. The air feels heavy. The silence is unsettling. The placement of objects feels off. Ann Burgess has experienced that moment more than most people ever will. She has spent decades studying the darkest things human beings do to one another. She has sat across from killers. She has walked crime scenes that forced veteran detectives outside just to catch their breath. She has read case files most people could never finish without having to look away. But she will tell you something few expect to hear. The most terrifying places she has visited weren't always covered in blood. They weren't always filled with chaos, wreckage, or signs of a struggle. Sometimes, the most horrifying places look perfectly normal. That is exactly what happened here. When Dr. Ann Burgess walked through this suspect's home, she found no mess, no broken furniture, no scattered belongings, no rooms suggesting someone had lost their mind inside. She found none of the wreckage people imagine when they think of a home marked by tragedy. Instead, she found a house that looked inhabited by someone who wasn't just living there, but functioning perfectly normally. The bed was made, the kitchen clean, surfaces cleared, and the furniture was in its place. Nothing was overturned, nothing broken, nothing seemed disrupted in the way that grief alters a space. And that was the first warning sign, because when the unthinkable happens, homes change. They always change. People stop caring about the dirty dishes stacking up in the sink. They leave lights on all night because the dark is frightening. They move through rooms differently. They avoid sitting in certain chairs without knowing why. They leave clothes on the floor that used to be spotless. Homes carry an emotional weight, and that weight always shows itself somehow. This house showed none of it. That is what Burgess noticed before anything else. Not what was present, but what was missing. Dr. Ann Burgess did not enter this field by accident. She helped build it. She was one of the original criminal profilers, working with the FBI to understand why people commit violent crimes. She didn't study the mechanics of crime, but the psychology behind it, the thought patterns and emotional framework, as well as behavioral signs before and after the offense. She laid the groundwork. Law enforcement still uses today to profile criminals, classify their behaviors, and understand what a crime scene communicates beyond the physical evidence. When Burgess examines a space, she isn't just looking at objects. She is decoding human behavior. She asks herself what the layout of the room and the state of the surfaces reveal about the presence or absence of certain details regarding the person who was there. And what this house revealed gave her pause, because homes don't lie the way people do. Someone can look you in the eye and say they are broken. They can weep on cue. They can say the exact right words in the perfect order. They can perform grief so well that no one would ever suspect. But the house they live in reflects something far harder to fake. It shows their routine. It reflects their habits. It reveals what someone actually does when they believe no one is watching. It mirrors their emotional life. And when that inner world is shattered by something real, the home almost always shows it. This one didn't. Burgess stepped through the room slowly. That is how she always works. Not rushing toward the obvious, not searching for drama, moving deliberately and paying attention to the tiny details. Those things that don't announce themselves, only revealing their secrets to someone who knows exactly how to look. The living room felt untouched in a way that was far too deliberate. Cushions perfectly arranged. Remotes neatly aligned. Nothing out of place. Nothing cast aside to make room for something more urgent. It gave off the strange impression of a place maintained, not lived in. She walked toward the kitchen. Clean. But not the way a kitchen is cleaned when family visits, and you want to make a good impression. It was a different kind of clean. The kind that reveals someone was recently there, making sure absolutely nothing was left out of place. Not a single dish drying. No crumbs on the counter. Not even the ring of a glass hastily placed on the surface. She opened a cabinet, everything organized. She examined another surface, spotless. Standing in the middle of the kitchen, She felt something she would later describe not as suspicion, but recognition. She had been in places like this. Places owned by people who need control far more than comfort. There is a massive difference between a clean home and a controlled one. Almost everyone understands cleanliness. It means you hate clutter and keep everything neat because chaos makes you uncomfortable. Being clean is normal, even admirable. But a controlled space is something else entirely. Controlled means the environment is managed, that the look of the place is deliberately maintained to serve a specific purpose. Controlled spaces do not breathe the same way lived-in places do. They lack those tiny imperfections of daily life scattered all around. They do not carry the casual clutter that comes with living in a place and letting that existence leave a trace. Controlled spaces fake things, and this place was faking normalcy. Burgess could feel it clearly. The house was not just clean. The home was coldly calculated. Every single detail inside seemed arranged to communicate one very clear thing. Nothing happened here, but something had happened here. Or nearby something so intense, it should have deeply shaken the resident, if they were even capable of being moved. Yet, the house claimed the exact opposite. That single revelation changed the course of the case, as investigators had been working under a different theory until then. They had been asking the usual questions, simply following the obvious trail of physical evidence. They had been reconstructing the facts from the outside in. Burgess, however, reconstructed the scene from the inside out. And there, she found no trace of a terrified person. Nor did she find anyone whose world had been shattered. There was no sign of grief, panic, or fear to betray a tragedy. What she found was someone who moved on unfazed, with no need to recover because, to begin with, they had never broken. This is not what normalcy looks like after a tragedy. After the horror, everything is chaos. It is leaving lights on, dirty dishes piling up, and a room smelling like someone who has not opened a window in 3 days. It is those small oversights of someone who no longer has the strength to pretend everything is fine. But here, there were no oversights. This was something maintained with pinpoint precision, and Burgess had seen this level of control before. She saw it in people unable to process what happened, and also in those who knew with surgical precision exactly what had transpired. She saw it in those for whom tragedy simply caused no pain, because mourning requires an emotional connection that certain people are simply incapable of feeling. As she walked through the house, she realized the most valuable find inside was not a physical object. It was the complete absence of something that should have been impossible to hide. There was no fear in that house, no pain, no mess, only a cold order. And to Dr. Ann Burgess, that was the most alarming thing since she crossed the front door. Burgess did not leave after that revelation. She decided to go even deeper into the house. That is what most people do not understand about behavioral analysis. It is not a job done from a distance. You cannot decipher a scene using a report, a photograph, or the simple testimony of a witness. You have to be inside. You must walk through the rooms, just like the person who lived there did. You need to feel the pulse of every room. And this home had a quiet, almost choreographed rhythm, the pace of someone going about their days with cold intent, free of any trace of urgency. Every area was used strictly for the purpose it was designed for, without exception. There was no chaos, no signs of one part of life invading another, no stray letters in the kitchen that belonged in the study, no shoes forgotten near the sofa. Absolutely everything was in the exact place where it belonged. Such precision stopped looking like an obsessive trait and revealed itself as a system designed to project a single lie, that the resident had nothing to hide. Burgess moved toward the bedroom. Bedrooms always reveal the truth. You sweep the living room for company. You clean the kitchen once it gets annoying. But the bedroom is private. The bedroom is where the performance ends. It is where people leave their book lying face down on the nightstand, where they leave a half-finished glass of water, where pillows are left messy because they grabbed one in the night and never fixed it. Bedrooms hold the version of a person that nobody else ever sees. This bedroom had none of those things. The bed was made with the surgical precision of a hotel. Perfect corners, a smooth surface, pillow centered and firm, not a single wrinkle on the bedspread. No books on the nightstand, no half-empty glasses, no tangled chargers by the lamp, no small personal items that someone might keep because they actually mean something, just a clean, empty, cold, and totally controlled space. Burgess stood at the foot of the bed for a long moment. He was not thinking about what was there. He was thinking of the person who slept there. Your sleep changes completely the moment something goes wrong. Anyone who has been through a hard time knows it. You can never sleep the same way again. You wake up at impossible hours. You reach for your phone before you are even fully conscious, because a part of your brain is still trying to process what happened. You adjust the sheets differently. You leave the light on longer than usual. The pain, the fear, and the initial shock live in the bedroom first, because that is where the body finally stops and the mind processes everything. This bedroom showed no trace of that struggle. It showed signs of a mind that never had that need. Burgess walked over to the closet, meticulously organized by category. Shirts together, pants together, everything facing the same way. Shoes lined up along the bottom, perfectly neat, no gaps. When something catastrophic happens in your life, it takes a very specific kind of person, not someone who channels pain into routines, but someone for whom the catastrophe caused no pain to heal in the first place. He walked back down the hall. Near the living room entrance, a shelf held a few decorative items, a small framed portrait, a candle that had never actually been lit, a few aligned objects that gave the impression of someone decorating with absolute care. Burgess stopped in front of the photograph. He stared at it for a long moment. Not because of who was in it, but where it was placed. Not on a nightstand or a desk, not in a spot where you put a picture, because you want to see it every day without even thinking. It sat on a shelf near the entrance, screaming that it was there to be noticed by anyone walking through the door. It was placed for guests, not for the person living in that home. Burgess caught that difference immediately. People suffering a loss do not stage photos for visitors. They keep them close. They put them where they walk past 10 times a day. They want to see that face. They crave the memory, even if it hurts. This photo was strategically placed to make an impression. That is not grief. That is a performance. He kept exploring the house. The bathroom looked identical. Clean surfaces, neat products, perfectly symmetrical towels. Not a single drop of water on the mirror. No trace of dried toothpaste in the sink. The guest room was the same. The bed made, even though nobody slept there. The blinds angled exactly like every other window. Every corner of this house screamed the same thing: order, consistency, control. But Burgess had long since stopped seeing rooms as just clean spaces. He read them as decisions, because every detail in a spotless place is a choice. Someone chose to wipe down that counter. Someone chose to fold that towel that way. Someone decided the blinds should be at the exact same level in every room. Someone decided the portrait had to be near the door so visitors would notice it. Decisions reveal priorities, and the priority here was not comfort, nor was it warmth. It was not the cozy peace of someone who just likes things tidy. The absolute priority was appearance. The house was staged. Burgess had a term for places like this: emotional staging, not crime scene staging, not to alter or hide evidence. This was staging on a deeper level, set up to project a specific identity, designed to say, "This is who I am and how I live, and nothing in this house should ever make you see me differently." It is what orderly, controlling minds do, without even fully realizing they are doing it. They build environments that reflect the version of themselves they want to show the world, and that public-facing version is always identical: calm, stable, completely ordinary. This house was not telling Burgess who that person really was. It revealed who this person needed the world to believe they were. And there is a massive gulf between those two things. She walked back into the living room and just stood there, right in the center. She had already paced the entire house, scanning every room, every surface, every folded shirt, and every spotlessly clean corner. Standing there, what struck her most was not some specific detail. It was the overall vibe the house projected. Taken together, all these tidy details sparked absolutely no emotion. And that was the most telling clue in the whole place. Because a home is supposed to say something. It should reflect the emotional temperature of the person living inside. When you step into someone's personal space, you expect to catch a glimpse of their true identity. You should feel their warmth, their personality, their past, the things they love, and the life they have built. But this house felt like a waiting room, functional, sterile, designed to be passed through without leaving a trace. Standing in the center, Burgess realized something that would take the rest of the investigation to fully decode. The house did not hide what had happened. The house hid the person who caused it. Worse yet, it had been doing so long before anyone thought to look inside. Burgess did not write down conclusions when she left. First, she quietly processed what this home was whispering. That is a crucial step most investigators usually overlook. They gather evidence and rush straight to analysis. They see the facts and jump immediately to conclusions. But Burgess learned long ago that the space between observing and interpreting is where the real breakthrough actually happens. She needed to understand not just what the house looked like, but what kind of mind leaves behind a home like this. Environments do not create themselves. They are shaped by habits, priorities, emotional needs, and the inner world of the person living inside. Every single decision made inside a house reflects something about the mind of the person who made it. And when those decisions form a constant pattern across every room, that pattern becomes something you can decode, something you can name. Burgess had a name for what she was seeing. She had witnessed it before, not always, but in the cases that haunted her. These were the cases that kept detectives awake at night, because the prime suspect never behaved the way everyone expected. She called it organized detachment, one of the most misunderstood behavioral profiles in the entire history of criminal profiling. Most people picture a very specific profile. When they think of someone capable of committing a truly horrific crime, they picture someone unstable, someone who completely cracks under pressure, someone whose emotions boil over, acting entirely on impulse, and leaving a trail of absolute chaos behind them. Because chaos is the logical byproduct of a crumbling mind, that image is real. Those people do exist, but they are not the only ones. There is another profile behavioral science has studied closely for decades. A person who does not crack, someone whose emotions never boil over, an individual whose inner world operates on a system completely foreign to the rest of us. Someone who views consequences differently. They do not experience chaos the same way. They do not process tragedy the way any ordinary person would. Instead, they simply compartmentalize it. They split the horror from their daily routine, locking it away so it cannot disrupt the mask of normal life they have perfected for years. Then they just carry on. Make the bed. They wipe down the counters. Line up the shoes. Place the family portrait right where guests will see it. They keep moving forward, because it is all they know how to do, and they are terrifyingly good at it. Burgess remembered the closet. The clothes sorted strictly by color, every single hanger pointing in the exact same direction. The shoes lined up perfectly below. She thought of the intense discipline required to build and maintain such a rigid system, not as a phase, but as a strict daily ritual. It requires someone who needs an orderly environment, because their peace of mind does not come naturally. It is built in a cold, calculated, and highly deliberate way. People with emotional flexibility do not need perfect closets. They can live with a shirt out of place, or shoes scattered slightly on the floor. That is because their inner world is strong enough to handle a little chaos without feeling threatened by it. But those who force such relentless order onto their surroundings do so because their own sanity depends on it. Their outer world must remain tightly controlled, because control is the only shield they have to contain their inner chaos. Strip away that control, and the whole system crumbles. But as long as that wall holds, the surface looks absolutely flawless, always immaculate. She thought about the photograph near the entrance, placed specifically for visitors to see, not for the person who actually lived there. That detail lingered as she walked through every room, pointing to something highly specific in the behavioral profile she was building. This individual possessed an intense, razor-sharp awareness of how they appeared to others, something far different from the simple, social awkwardness of everyday people. Almost all of us care a little about what others think. That is completely normal. It is a natural human reaction. But most of us do not design our private spaces around the judgment of outsiders. Ordinary people let their homes be a sanctuary and manage their public image elsewhere. This individual made no such distinction. Their private space was just part of the stage performance, which meant that true privacy did not exist. This implied there was no authentic version of this subject outside of their own performance. Burgess had seen this before when profiling criminals with pronounced narcissistic personality traits. This was not self-centeredness in the everyday sense, but rather a diagnosis of clinical narcissism. We are talking about a disorder where someone can only perceive themselves through the eyes of others. They build and maintain this mask, not out of vanity, but because it structurally supports the foundation of their identity. Strip away the facade, and nothing remains underneath to support the self. That is why the mask never slips, not in public, not at home, and never during a tragedy. She built the profile methodically. Organized external environment checked. No emotional trace in private areas checked. Belongings arranged to impress rather than for comfort checked. Routine unaffected by major external events checked. Taken individually, of course, every single detail could be explained away. Some people are clean freaks. Others love order. Some just keep an absolutely spotless home, and that reveals absolutely nothing about their inner self. Burgess knew this defense by heart. She had heard it in courtrooms, interrogation rooms, and in debates with detectives who still doubted the case. But she understood what those excuses always overlooked. It is never about a single clue, it is the pattern. A clean room says nothing. An organized closet says nothing. A photo in one specific spot says nothing either. But an entire house broadcasting that same cold vibe in every single corner reveals a highly specific message. It tells us nothing was an accident. It was intentional. And artificial stages belong to those who are pretending. In behavioral science, there is a fundamental concept: compartmentalization. Almost everyone understands this concept in a general sense. They usually use it when talking about leaving work stress at the door, or shutting out heavy emotions to focus on a task. But in forensic behavioral psychology, this exact coping mechanism represents something far more precise and deeply disturbing. It is the chilling ability to isolate a memory so thoroughly that it does not disrupt daily routine at all. This is not about repressing or resisting. It is shut away, sent directly into a sealed compartment of the mind. The door locks behind it, and life continues unaffected. The average human mind simply cannot do this. When a tragedy strikes, the wound bleeds. It ruins your sleep, appetite, focus, daily habits, and even the way you walk through your own home. It overflows because our brains are not wired to contain disaster without leaving behind some kind of trace. Yet, some individuals pull this off not due to mental strength, but because their brain wiring operates differently. The emotional bond that makes an event tragic is absent or restricted in these minds, and their homes reflect exactly that. Burgess paused in the hallway, her thoughts turning to the victim. She analyzed the relationship between the homeowner and the person who was gone, because the walls also spoke of that connection. They did not do so overtly, or through some suicide note or a private journal. There were no keepsakes indicating closeness or couple arguments. The emptiness was the only witness. In this house, there were no signs that another soul had truly shared the space, no evidence of a love with any real weight. It lacked those little items saved for sentimental value, or the scuff marks on furniture indicating constant, shared use. There was no second rhythm living beneath the first. The atmosphere signaled that this place had always belonged to just one person. It answered to a single mind, a solitary obsessive ego, where making room for another person to actually exist was never considered. That sheer coldness revealed to Burgess the true dynamic of their connection. It did not operate like a real partnership, or a bond between two people who valued each other equally, like something else. Something this tenant kept strictly on his own terms, for personal reasons, never allowing it to take root deep inside him. And when what you feel for someone has never taken deep root inside you, losing them doesn't feel like grief is supposed to feel. It feels manageable. Like something you can lock away and bypass on your way to make the bed. Burgess walked back toward the entryway, passing the shelf with the portrait. She looked at it again. The face in the frame stared back, and she thought about how the person who had placed it there had done so with deliberate, calculated care, at the exact height and angle so anyone crossing the threshold would notice. Not to remember, but to be seen remembering. That subtle difference was everything. Burgess didn't rush to write her report. First, she stepped back outside. She paused at the threshold, turned, and studied the property from the outside, just as a neighbor would see it, or a delivery person, or anyone passing by on an ordinary day. Everything looked perfect. It looked exactly like every other house on the block. Well-kept, ordinary, and unremarkable. The kind of house that stirs no emotion in the viewer, because nothing on its facade was designed to trigger any. And that was the point. That was always the point. The home had been engineered from the inside out, shaping the exterior to blend in and vanish into the surroundings, making it look irrelevant, something no one would stop for or examine. Nothing that would cause a passing neighbor to stop and suspect something was wrong inside. Burgess had seen this before. The most dangerous environments are not the ones that scream for attention. They are the ones that blend in. She thought of all the people who had walked in before her, friends, acquaintances, people who sat in this spotless living room chatting, leaving without sensing anything off about what they had just witnessed. People who perhaps commented on how tidy it was, how clean and well-organized the house looked. None of them analyzed the space like Burgess did, because they had no idea what they were looking for, and it wasn't their fault. They weren't trained to read a room like a record of human behavior. They don't wonder what a room reveals about its creator's inner world. They were just passing through, and whoever lived here understood that perfectly, absorbed it deeply, and knew how to exploit it. Because if everyone who crossed the threshold left thinking about how lovely and orderly the house was, then no one would ask the harder, underlying question, why did it look so beautiful and orderly? This home was no reflection of a full life, it was a barrier. Burgess sat in her car outside and opened her notebook. She didn't start with the obvious. She didn't first write down the clean countertops, the tidy closet, or the impeccably made bed. She started with what lay beneath all those superficial elements, connecting them all together. The emotional temperature of the residence, because that was the most revealing discovery of all. It wasn't about a single object or a specific room, but the overall climate of the house. And that atmosphere was flat behaviorally, emotionally, and psychologically flat. No traces of warmth in the corners, the way it usually gathers in homes, where people actually live, love, and misplace things. Nor were there cold spots, where grief had settled. The way morning settles in rooms no one dares step into anymore. There was no imbalance whatsoever, only a constant, deliberate neutrality running through every room like an electric current. That coldness was information. It showed Burgess that the resident didn't view their home as a space where emotional life unfolded. To them, it was a place where emotional life was managed. There is a gulf between those two realities that most never have to cross. This individual lived in that gap and had done so for a very long time. She wrote a single line at the start of her notes. It did not look like a stranger lived here. She underlined that phrase because it was the feeling that had unsettled her from the moment she walked in, the foundation upon which the entire investigation must be built. It didn't feel like a stranger had lived there. It felt intimate. It felt familiar. As if whoever lived there was fully aware of the exact message the environment was broadcasting. It wasn't decorated by someone indifferent to aesthetics, but calculated by an individual who understood appearances with surgical precision and used that advantage for a very long time. A stranger would never do this. A stranger moves awkwardly, leaving erratic traces of someone still trying to figure out who they are within their surroundings. This individual knew exactly who they were in relation to their surroundings. It was designed to suggest exactly that. She mentally reviewed the investigation done up to that point and the framework the detectives were working under. She understood why they built that exact hypothesis. The physical evidence pointed in one direction, and the timeline revealed certain patterns. Those involved fit specific roles from the outside. But behavioral analysis never starts on the exterior. It starts on the inside and works its way out. And if you start inside this house, you get a very different picture. You discover someone who operated in the shadows for far too long. Criminal behavioral science draws a clear line between reactive offenders and organized criminals. Reactive offenders are driven by emotion. They act under pressure, deciding fast, and the result is chaos. Their environment reflects that same impulsivity. Their homes reveal the clutter of someone who lacks absolute control over their own emotional state. Organized criminals are different. They plan, manage, and maintain total order. Their actions are cold, calculated, and controlled. Their homes look just like those of law-abiding citizens who have never broken a rule. Driven by a need for control, they build facades that look completely normal to the outside world. The problem with these criminals is that their entire behavior is designed to avoid detection, not through theatrical tricks or absurd cover-ups, but through a simpler, more lethal mechanism, simply appearing completely ordinary. They rely on the fact that almost nobody is trained to see a spotless kitchen as evidence. Nobody is trained to read a perfectly made bed as a warning sign. Almost no one knows how to look at a home lacking emotional chaos after a devastating event and realize that very emptiness is the most valuable piece of evidence. Burgess was trained for exactly this, and every clue she knew how to track was right inside. She realized how this would shift the entire case, because a psychological profile does not just describe a personality. It provides a framework to understand how a suspect reacts under pressure, and the key factor here was intense scrutiny. How does a cold, calculating, organized mind react when it knows someone is watching? By doing exactly what this house suggested. They maintain control. They do not break. They never confess. They do not fall apart to give investigators looking to solve the case an easy win. They keep the mask on, because maintaining that perfect facade is the only way they know how to survive. That is why the police cannot simply sit back and wait for the facade to crack on its own. They must understand the mechanics of this deception, to find the exact spot where the lie is weakest. To do that, they have to accept that key evidence might not look suspicious at first glance. It might be a clean house, a tidy closet, or perhaps a portrait positioned strategically for visitors rather than the actual homeowner. It could look like a bed so neatly made the room resembles a display stage, a cold place where no one carrying real guilt would ever sleep. It might look like absolutely nothing at all, until you finally understand what you are looking at. Burgess finished writing her notes and sat still in the quiet car, staring at the facade again through the windshield. From the outside, it looked exactly as it had before, neat, quiet, with absolutely nothing drawing attention. The kind of home you drive past without a second glance. But she could no longer ignore what she found inside. There was that absolute coldness. Items staged purely to impress, and a complete lack of grief in every private space. She recalled the closet that reflected systematic planning over actual living, and that portrait meant only for strangers. That bedroom where it seemed no one had ever woken up in terror. The house had been confessing this whole time, not in the language the detectives expected, but through the subtle, unspoken signs of behavior. And through that lens, the message was clear. From the very moment she stepped through the front door, the person living here did not change. Because of the tragedy, they had already become exactly what they needed to be, long before it happened. The house did not feel like the home of a complete stranger. It felt like the home of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, ensuring that nobody on the outside would ever suspect a thing.